Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
All of our guests today brought to you by our title sponsor. They've been with us for 2 years. Our thanks to Able Auctions, ableauctions.ca, and our guests, of course, including Thomas Drance, standing by from The Athletic. I guess I called Anthony Beauvillier Nathan Beauvillier in the highlights. I've done that a couple of times.
Who's Nathan Beauvillier?
I don't know.
Oh, I thought he was...
I don't know.
Some CFL legend or something.
Maybe somebody I went to school with.
Could be no teacher.
I won't get Thomas Drance's name wrong. No way.
It's hard to mess that one up.
Thomas Drance joins us now from The Athletic in the wake of the 5-2 Canuck loss to the Kraken. The Canucks have now lost 4 straight as the season winds down. Thomas, thanks for doing this on a Wednesday, 2 days early. How are you?
Gentlemen, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Tough loss for the Canucks, but also high leverage. That was a must-lose game for Vancouver, particularly given that Detroit and St. Louis won. Big picture, that was just about the optimal outcome for this hockey team. It's just the way they went about it, dispiriting for sure. Yeah.
Chicago winning too, Thomas. What do you make of...
Too late for the Blackhawks to catch anybody, I think.
That's true. What do you make of Rick Tockett's comments about a lack of energy?
Yeah, I think he was right. I think So I'm of two minds here, right, gentlemen? Like, I think if this team had played the last 6 weeks like they did last night, like they have over the course of the past week, I think that would have put the organization in a far better position, big picture, than what they've actually done, right? So I want to sort of start with that because, I can't be saying, hey, this team should be losing, and then turn around and be like, man, what a terrible performance. Like, this is what it should have looked like for the last 7 weeks. It hasn't. Instead, this team has talked about the importance of culture and structure, and then they mail it in like that. I thought the third period was as dismal as this club has looked all season. I was troubled by the way JT Miller left the bench in frustration early at the end of the second period. And I think some of that points to, some of the issues we've seen this core group have over the course of the past 3 years, which is that when the going gets tough, it feels like shoulders slump and players get mad at each other, and we see these broken sticks on the bench and lazy line changes. At some point you need to show a little bit of resilience, right? Like, isn't that what they're talking about when they're talking about structure? I think we saw better habits, better body language from this team for 4 or 5 weeks under Rick Tocchet, but it feels like, reality has set in. The old habits are cropping back up. And, I sort of do kind of look at those things and think, man, like, I know it looks fine on paper, but can you win with a group that carries themselves like this? At the end of the day, in a league like the NHL where you have 82 games, like, the win's not always going to be at your back, gentlemen. Sometimes you got to run uphill. Sometimes you're going to get a goaltender injury and have 2 months of bad goaltending. And when that happens, are the players slumping after every bad goal? Are they blaming the netminders? Or are they figuring out how to make it work? Fundamentally, good teams figure out a way to make it work. I just think there were enough signs of some of the same intangible issues that have cropped up and continually sabotaged this particular group. Well, I think we saw some of that last night. To me, that undoes at least some of the basis for optimism that we had built up based on short-term process in the early part of the Rick Tocchet era. So, I got what he was saying. I thought Tocchet's performance last night post-game was the best that the Canucks got at Rogers Arena on Tuesday evening.
The other thing you said, Thomas, that was disturbing is some guys are not into it. Some are still playing for their NHL lives. The evaluation process by Tocchet is not over. The guys that don't have 5-6 year contracts, Thomas, should be busting their hump 24/7 to make this team for next year. And yet he says last night some guys are not into it. That's disturbing.
Yeah, it is. And yet, it is like mentally, no matter what, and I think it's worth noting, right? This was the first time we saw the Canucks play or start a game in which they'd already been mathematically eliminated. And no matter who you are, no matter how high your standard of professionalism, it does get tougher to perform when, that little Z is beside your team's name in the standings. I think we are just watching the inevitable struggle that occurs once the reality of a team situation truly rears its head. But yeah, I mean, there's no excuse for some of the guys who are going to be on the fringes of this roster who are going to need to make really solid cases for themselves at training camp to be performing poorly. And they are performing poorly. I mean, look at the shot totals that this team has managed over the past few games. Look at power play 1 last night. Team didn't have focus, didn't play with focus, deserved everything they got against the Seattle Kraken.
Thomas, what do you make of Cole McWard, signed by the Canucks yesterday out of Ohio State? He's going to play tomorrow against Chicago. So that's 4. If you're going to count McDonough, that's 4 NCAA guys they've signed in the last 3 or 4 weeks. What do you make of that? I've never seen them this active on the college free agent market in the last few years.
Yeah, and I wouldn't count McDonough because McDonough was drafted. He's their property.
But it
right?
was a signing. And
it was, yeah. Well, sure, but he wasn't a free agent signing, right? So for me, I would count the 3 guys, and then I'd be more inclined to count Topolio, or the Belarusian goalie that they signed out of the Allsvenskan, right? So I would sort of look at it as they've already gotten some business done with 1 European free agent and 3 NCAA free agents, and then did really good work getting their own drafted player, Aiden McDonough, signed. That would be how I'd sort of organize it. McWard, to me, is the most interesting one, Rick, to be totally honest with you. And here's why. Akito Hirose and Max Sasson are, like, no question about it, elite NCAA players, right? They were top of the lineup guys, played huge minutes for their teams, and dominated in absolutely every facet of the game in Div 1 last season. Now, they're older players, right? Max is 23. Akito's going to turn 24 shortly. So, you'd expect them to have some time on McWard, some development runway that they've already run effectively. But McWard is a project, like a totally different caliber of player at the Div 1 level. We're talking about a supporting piece for the Ohio State Buckeyes as opposed to a signature one like Akito and Max were. And to me, what that implies is that the club is really beginning to grapple with just how hard it is to find right-handed defensemen. Like to the point where McWard to me represents, a real roll of the dice. Not a high-end Div 1 guy, but a guy who's 21. He's coming out of his sophomore year. There's a chance that he could develop into something within this organization. Mobile, rare profile, like you like all that stuff, but like truly, this is a guy who, based on his sophomore year performance with Ohio State and his freshman performance, sort of profiles as a pretty run-of-the-mill NCAA player. The fact that the club was this aggressive in getting this done, pulling him out, taking a bit of a higher risk gamble on a player at his age and stage, I think tells you a lot about how they're viewing the need and the priority to just land warm bodies who can play the right side. And so that's sort of how I read this, particularly given that the club wasn't able to close the deal with the likes of Malinsky and Livingston. They still got a right-handed defenseman in this process. I think that's worth doing.
And Thomas, before we let you go, in The Athletic, yourself and Harm Dial have come up with a list of the Canucks' top 10 prospects, which is surprising for a lot of people. People aren't sure if they have 10 prospects at all. But who is number one on the list?
Yeah, it's Atu Ratu. And look, I know people will be surprised that it's not Jonathan Lekaramäki, given the draft capital the club invested, selecting him 15th overall in Montreal just 10 months ago. But man, Lekaramäki's season has been really concerning. Now, I know there's significant injury context that needs to be accounted for, right? He lost a lot of his summer due to mono. He sustained a concussion in midseason, and then the end of his regular season was somewhat ruined by a knee injury. He's played a little bit better in the playoffs, but here's the fact of the matter, and I've got a piece going up shortly on NHL player comparables. Here's the facts, gentlemen. players that score and produce offense the way that Lekaramäki has as an 18-year-old in the Allsvenskan don't go on to be impact players in the NHL. Like, period. There's no history of a guy with Lekaramäki's scoring profile translating into a, top 6 or middle 6 offensive winger in the NHL. We couldn't get over that concern. Like, as much as I believe still in the pedigree of the player, and as much as I'm willing to take the context of his injuries into account, and that's why we kept him at number 2, despite what's truly been a nightmare campaign. When you compare that profile to Aatu Räty's, it's stark. Like, the fact is that with Räty, when we did the same exercise and compared him statistically to historical players, like the fact that he's even played NHL games and been as productive as he has been, right? Which, not hugely productive, but 3 points in 15 NHL games. Like, 80% of the players that profile similarly go on to have big time NHL careers, right? Among the comparables that we found for Räty were guys like JT Miller and Ryan Johansson and Mika Zibanejad, like real NHL stars, in addition to a variety of guys who sort of made it as middle 6 or role players. AHL production, same thing, right? He's been really productive at a really precocious age, at the age of 20 in the American League. Again, for me, at this point, based on how they've trended over the course of this season, like, Räty looks like a far better bet, both from a ceiling perspective, an upside perspective, but also in terms of the safety or the relative security that he offers as a guy who's exceedingly likely at this point, based on what he's accomplished as a 20-year-old. And he's one of 10 guys in his draft class, gentlemen, who have played over 10 NHL games to this point, right? Like, we are talking about a guy who's come on significantly since he was drafted in the second round. For me, there was ultimately no contest in sort of establishing the top of our ranking. Räty is Vancouver's best prospect, and by some margin.
This is our second anniversary today, and Thomas, as we let you go,
congratulations.
We want to thank you for your participation, your support of our show.
Well, I love your show, gentlemen. You guys do a fantastic job, even you, Rick. And and I love coming on and getting to join you once a week. Thank you for having me. Thank you for making a part of the show. It's an absolute pleasure, and I'm stoked, positively stoked for your success, gentlemen. Congratulations.
And the fact we have jobs. Thank you, Thomas. Appreciate it.
Always a plus in our line of work, boys.
That's right. Thomas Drance from The Athletic.